Happy New Year and welcome to Season 3 of the Ferment. That's right, this is the beginning of our third year of having conversations with all kinds of people about worship and spiritual transformation. And I am really excited to get going again. Also, let's be honest, it feels really good just to let go of 2020. Am I right? Anyhow, we are kicking off this season with Sandra McCracken. She's a singer-songwriter from Nashville and someone I've looked up to for some time. She's prolific, she's an artist in the truest sense, and she has a long history of giving the church some really great language to sing in worship. One of the things that's always inspired me about Sandra's writing is the way that she leans into Scripture. She really embodies having a Scripture-soaked imagination. And I think that comes through in our conversation. Anyhow, feels really good to be back. Feels good to be talking to people again. Feels good to be, just doing the things we do out in the world in a brand new year. Not only that, I'm really pleased to kick off this season with such a great heart. All right, people, let's do this. All right, what up, everybody? This is the Ferment Podcast, and today's special guest is Sandra McCracken. What up, Sandra?
Hey, how are you, Adam? It's good to be here with you.
Oh, I'm so good. I'm so happy that you're on. I've wanted to have this conversation for a very long time.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
Yeah, well, I wanted to have this conversation because you are a songwriting hero of mine.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, yes way. I've been just really, really impressed by your work, and it's been one of those things that's been sort of at the side and in the background of my life for a very long time. So I wanted to share you with the rest of the Vineyard crew.
Man, thank you so much. Well, I love the name of your podcast, I got to say. It just sits with me, and it's one of those, just Ferment. I mean, it's been fun to listen to some of your work over the last, has it been 2 years?
Yeah, we've done this for about 2 years, and it's been really fun.
That's awesome.
Well, here's what I want to do first before we go to any history or anything that's more serious. I just want to start with some quick hitters, if that's okay.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, let me turn to my page that has quick hitters on it.
Okay.
All right, here we go. Number 1, sushi or steak?
Is this like a today question or in general?
No, you take it any way you want to take it.
Sushi.
Okay.
I was actually just at Kroger, and I was like, why does the sushi at Kroger look so good?
That's a real question. That's how far we are into this pandemic.
This is true.
The Kroger sushi is looking good. Okay, number 2, old guitars or new guitars?
Old guitars. 100%.
Electric or acoustic?
Acoustic for me.
Yes. Okay, this one might be hard, okay?
Okay.
Dolly or Emmylou?
Emmylou.
Good choice.
Oh, thanks.
All right, here we go. Here's another one. Big party with 100 of your friends or quiet evening with 5?
Quiet evening with 5.
Okay, last one.
Cross-country is this like a personality test?
Yeah, well, this is a way for us to kind of get an idea of who you are.
It's great.
Yeah, exactly. This is me trying to come from the side.
You're going to it's going to be like my Enneagram number and my Myers-Briggs at the end of this.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, here's the final one. Cross-country drive or transatlantic flight?
Oh, cross-country drive.
Oh, there you go. See, that actually makes a lot of sense, especially if you're into small, quiet evenings with 5 of your friends' acoustic guitars that are old. That actually makes more sense to me. So at least you're consistent.
Okay. I do really like being in an airplane. Maybe it's just right now. That doesn't sound as appealing.
Listen.
Right?
Listen,
I
don't consider myself to be a germaphobe.
Yeah.
But there's something about airplanes. Every time, even before the pandemic, I would get on there and just go, what are we breathing? Who's been here?
Yeah, for sure. Especially the long flights, because there's no new air coming in there.
No, what's happening? Well, let's do this. Let's shift gears here. We'll do what we always do on this podcast, which is just a little bit of personal history. Could you just tell us all where you came from and what your family was like?
I'm from Missouri, and I grew up in a big family. I'm the youngest. And everybody, lots of big personalities. It was always a big party. I mean, you talk about the big party in the small group. It was definitely I loved that in my childhood. And music was like the background to that. So even when I was a kid, I loved music. I didn't really imagine doing that as a living and making a living playing music or anything. But I loved the songs that came on the record player that my siblings and my family would all play. So Johnny Cash and Emmylou Harris, John Denver, the Eagles, like a lot of this stuff that it was country music, what we'd call country music now, but it was just pop music. That was what was on the radio. And that really gave me a lot of, it's like the nostalgic place for me now and living in Nashville all these years later.
That's great. Were you raised in a family of faith?
Yeah, we had, I would say like everybody's at a different place on that spectrum. And my mom had come to faith through like a women's Bible study, not too many years before I was born. So she really had a fire under her. And in my early years, I benefited so much from that because she taught me scripture and she prayed with me every day and just gave me a lot of context for the faith that I have now.
Yeah. So where did the music part come in?
The music part was probably closely connected to like journaling and writing and self-expression. So it was like I would write, and by middle school, I was kind of putting songs together with that. But I started playing piano when I was about 8 years old. We borrowed a piano from some friends, and I really just couldn't stay away from it. So I would spend long hours just sitting and making up songs and reading things from a hymnal and taking lessons all through my upbringing. The way I see it now, it was also kind of part of my prayer life. And I played pop songs and songs from Broadway musicals and everything else too. But it was a way that I could express faith and questions and stories and make sense of life. Music became that place.
Was there someone else in your family who was a musician, or did you just take piano lessons and it kind of sparked something inside of you?
Everybody loves music, and one of my brothers was he did some like theater and stuff in high school and was really good at it. But on the whole, people he now works at Apple and does a completely different thing. So there's nobody else that's really pursued this in that way, even if there was maybe some natural ability there.
Wow. I'm always interested in where musicians come from and how they happen,
Yeah.
Well, talk to me about this, though. You are a musician and you're a songwriter. And so I guess one of the questions I have is, how do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as more a songwriter, a singer, a musician? How do you feel about what you do?
I like being able to do creative work that's connected to music in a lot of different spaces, right? So I like the songwriting. I like playing the songs. But I would say at the center of it, the thing that really drives me is like the connection point. So if I put words to something and then I put it out into the world and somebody says, wow, that's how I feel, that point of connection with other people is where like the electricity, the spark is. And I don't know if it's what motivates it, but it's definitely the part where I feel like I'm on the right path. So that can happen by songwriting. I would say like songwriting is probably where I spend the most time these days. Tell stories and then put them to music. That's what I love the most.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you about your music in particular here, because you are a songwriter and you've written lots of different kinds of songs and you've been doing this for more than a minute. But one of the themes or one of the streams inside of your music that I see, or I'm very attentive to, is there's this very strong section of your career that's what I would call like church music. Mm-hmm. And so I would love for you to just talk to me about, why do you keep coming back to songs that are, could be sung at church? Because you could just be a folk pop artist. You could totally do that. You do that. And I'm always interested in when people keep making these circles back to church music, because I have friends who are in similar veins.
Yeah. Well, when I moved to Nashville I moved here in the mid-90s to go to school. When I was a kid, I'd read all the liner notes in the records, those country records I told you about, and then had some friends that knew some of the Christian music that was coming out of Nashville. And so I'd read those liner notes and find out who those people are. Fast forward to when I moved to Nashville, and I pretty quickly realized, like, I just didn't want to camp out in any one place. And so I just kind of like stepped back a little bit and wanted to pay attention to the whole thing, just not to jump too quickly into church music or into Christian music as it was at that time in like 95 or like in the early 2000s. And so I think it was gradual, where I was trying to get my bearings and figure out what was my, like, who is it that talks about the thing you enjoy most connecting to the need that there is in the world. And one of the places that I've seen that affirmed over the years, which is I guess why I keep coming back to it, is taking the words of scripture and just singing them plainly, just so it's a little different. That, like, you could call it church music, you could call it gospel music, you could call it folk music, the music of the people. Like, in a sense, when I look at the Psalms, and I feel like the Psalms read like Bob Dylan music, like they read like stanzas that are expressive and they're gritty. They say all the things you're not supposed to say on a Sunday, and yet they give us permission to just bring it all out before God, and that God is not surprised, or he doesn't shrink back from it. He actually invites it. So I think in that place where I would just like sing a psalm from the page, that is where I feel most at home. And I do love it because it reminds me of Dylan songs. And I do love it because it's like a throwback to some other time. And it does connect us to someone who's been before us. And it gives us a good promise that it's going to be all right.
Mm. Well, that's very interesting that you bring a few of those things up, because they were already in my questions I wanted to ask you. Because not only are you a person who does church music in addition to lots of other kind of songs, but a lot of your music is lyrically very, very rooted in Scripture, and specifically the Psalms. So I would like to maybe even unpack that a little bit more. Like, what's the attraction to the Psalms? Like you said, it's Dylan. There's nothing off limits. But is there anything else?
Yeah. Well, I guess I would start by saying that I'm really grateful for the people in my life, like my mom and all the people that have poured scripture into me over the years, where from a very young age, like, it wasn't an intentional thing where I set out, okay, I'm going to make church music about this. I'm going to sing these Psalms. It was like these words of the Psalms were planted in my heart. And then when I started writing songs, that's what came out. So I think that's true regardless of your vocation. So it's transcendent. Like, scripture itself is alive. So it is breathed by God. And then when we take it in, it has its own, like, it brings our spirit to life. It speaks God's spirit through us. That's what's so wild about it, is it's like, I didn't really do this.
Yeah.
He uses whatever your vocational gifts are to manifest his spirit into the world. And that, man, that's like pretty incredible. Like the freedom of that, when we can kind of forget ourselves and make a channel for that kind of movement. I guess that's what it's all about. And it could happen in music, but it could happen in 1,000 other spheres of life too.
Yeah. Well, isn't it interesting that you could take something from the Psalms, lyrics, songs, poems that are a couple thousand years old, and you could, as you said a moment ago, you could write them as plainly as you can, and there's still something alive about it. Mm-hmm. I just love that idea. Could you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I do. I really love that, because so if I sit down to write or to work on a song, and there's a lot going on in that moment. So I'll be convicted by what's on the page, or it'll just be really moving. And then I put that song aside, and then 6 months later, I find myself performing in a room on a stage somewhere else. And once again, that song becomes new, because those words are actually God's words that are doing something in my heart. And because we're such forgetful people, it's like we have to keep hearing these same truths. We have to keep remembering truth and kind of singing ourselves forward in that.
There's a couple great phrases there. Forgetful people, we have to sing ourselves forward. I think you're dropping song lyrics on us right here. Love that. Well, let me ask you another question about songwriting, especially because you've written for a couple decades and you have a ton of records. How do you just not run out? How do you sustain art? I guess that's the question I wanted to ask.
Man, I think we would all be tempted to have days where we think like, well, maybe I've already, peaked, and it's already, like maybe I peaked in high school or whatever. And we all think maybe it's all downhill from here. But I don't believe that that's the way the gospel works. I think, man, I think about this a lot, but Dan Allender has this book called To Be Told, where he's talking about like when we're face to face with Jesus and he says our name, like he has a name for us that's not just your like name that you were given in the hospital where you were born, but we're hurling toward that moment. And So the job we do or the songs we write or whatever we're applying ourselves to in our day-to-day lives, there's a promise that is like this thread that is pulling us forward to that. And I guess that's the encouragement, is like, we are not going to run out because he's committed. Like, the one who promised is faithful and he will accomplish it. So if it were up to me, or if it were about what I could contribute or my own ideas, then we'd be in trouble. But we wouldn't have started this in the first place if it were up to me, And so I guess that's the real hope, is that the one who promised is faithful.
Yeah. But I guess if I'm just wanting to needle here for a second.
Yeah, come on.
Are you ever afraid that there's not any more songs left, or that there's not an album left in you?
Oh, man. Yeah. And especially when I look at this year, where the normal affirmations, like the affirmations that I'm used to experiencing, like being on the road and having interactions with people in person, like when those things are stripped away, you're really confronted again with the question of like, who am I without the songs, And I think that can be an uncomfortable place, but it's actually a place that will bear fruit later. Yeah, that's been hard this year. And there are a lot of days I'm like, in my pajamas on Zoom calls and not sure what I'm contributing.
Yeah, I think that's all of us, though. Yeah.
Yeah. But when I sit down to write songs, then there's also been such an outpouring of creativity, even and especially this year. And I think those are really encouraging reminders that God is continuing to do new things, and he's making new things within us.
Well, let me just throw that question to you, the one that you sort of brought up there in the telling of the question. Okay, so we've had this crazy year, and you said a moment ago, when the normal affirmations are stripped away from you, you have to sort of like dig back into, who is it that I am and why am I here? Mm-hmm. What has this year taught you?
Yeah, I was able to finish an album of songs this year called Patient Kingdom. And, maybe 3 years ago when I started compiling these songs, it was a batch of songs that I wanted to be songs that push back against anxiety, and which is so funny now,
Yeah.
And I think in this year, my anxiety has actually quieted a lot. And I think just even in new discomfort where we're all in one house together, the kids are on school at home, and I mean, just all these other variables, whatever. This is like the year of improvisation, right? And in that, I think I've really just had to sit in it, and just be who I am without songs, without external opportunities to collaborate, and just I think I've made some peace with that in a way that I wouldn't have had to do. I wouldn't have had to slow down. There's a line in that song that says, "Slow me down, let love do its work."
Yeah.
And I think we have a lot of romantic ideas of what love is. And it's that quiet moment of opening your hands and saying, yeah, I receive it. I'll receive what this is today.
What else is kind of like percolated up this year? You're not on tour. You are at home. Have you just been finding more comfort and joy in home stuff? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, yes. And I'm actually just turning in my first draft of a book called Send Out Your Light that'll be out next year, Lord willing. And so it's the first time I've ever done something of that volume, even though I do really find a lot of joy in writing. Yeah. To sit down to write a book, it's really about the illumination of scripture and song. It's meandering a little bit. It's part songs, part lyrics. There's some stories in there of my own. But yeah, I've spent a lot of time on that and really enjoyed that this year. It was perfect timing, as they say.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of us have maybe said in one moment or another, one of these days I'm going to write a book when I have the time.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So here we go.
Yeah. One of the gifts of the plague year, right?
That's right.
Well, let me ask you one more question about songwriting. Talk to me about how much you think about the end listener when you're writing. Is that something you have in your mind, or do you not even go there? Do you just go with your guts and what's in the moment?
I think as I have grown, I think increasingly I consider that connection point with the listener. So I think in the very beginning, when I started writing songs, it's a natural part of songwriting that you would want to express how you feel. But then I think maturity in songwriting is when you can express with the intent of connecting to someone else or to giving that song. So there's like a generative part of it that is exactly what you're saying. That is, I both aspire to it and want to grow and, move toward that. And that songwriting would be mutual, that it would be with and for others. So I think about that a lot more. Even like singability of melodies. When I first started singing, I only thought about really how it sounded in my own voice. And now, like, I'd much rather sing something that like 100 people could sing at the same time and not get tripped up by the like stylistic things. I just really love that idea of singing together.
Well, there's something in what you're describing right now. For whatever reason, the word hospitality comes to mind. It's like the hosting side of being a songwriter. Mm-hmm. It's not just the expressive side, but it's making a moment.
Yeah. I've heard Yo-Yo Ma talk about that. He did an interview with Terry Gross on Being, and he was talking about performance as hospitality, like when he goes in to play a concert as a cellist, and he thinks of himself as the host and everybody comes in. And of course, that to me resonates so quickly to the liturgy that would say Christ is the host and we are his guests. So when we come close to relationship walking with Jesus, there is also the sense that we become more hospitable because that is who he is. And it's really, man, that's true. And if music could be anything, it would be like, a big sign that says all are welcome,
Well, let me shift gears again here. The name of this podcast is The Ferment, and sort of the controlling metaphor that we kind of have been running on for 2 years is that things change. Like maybe things that started out as grapes, they become wine. Definitely the same, but different. And so I'm just wondering what things have changed in your life? Either emotionally or spiritually. Like what things have undergone a fermentation over the arc of your life or your career?
Yeah. When I look back at songs, I really love that concept. And I think that's probably one of the primary themes in my songs is responding to change. And I think about even on my, it was like second or third album, there's a song called Train Car. And it's such an obscure reference, but talking about like in the change, it's like a train car running off the tracks. Like you can run behind, but you can't get it back. Like the sense that we're sort of always chasing something. We think we're about to arrive. We think this train's about to pull into the station. It's just going to keep moving. And if I think about the last few years in my life and I think about like my kids, and then my husband and I have been married a couple of years, we have a baby that's 1.5 years. And I've heard it described where if you take a family like ours, it's like, it's so beautiful. And it's like we're living in a Grand Central Station and all of us arrived here by different trains. And so when we sit down to have a meal or to have a conversation, there's something understandably kind of chaotic about that.
Yeah.
And yet there's something really shared that, hey, how does this feel for you? Because it's probably really different for me. And so change, when we experience change, it's like one of the most dynamic places where we can learn to love each other. And it's also one of the hardest,
Yeah. Yeah. I love that picture of a family that's kind of come from all kinds of places and has arrived in the same moment in the same house. Even just in my mind, I'm seeing like the same dinner table and the chaos that comes around that. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, talk to me about spiritual journeys. And if this isn't too on the nose, one of the things that has come up on this podcast over and over again, and it only came up so many times that I started to see it in Scripture as well, is that people are oftentimes on a journey, and like the way they started is not the way they are now. Like something there, even your image of a train car. Yeah, there's something there that is connected to the past, but it's moved forward. And I'm just wondering if things have moved forward in your spiritual journey as well.
Yeah, I think in the last few years, I've enjoyed some different spiritual practices. And so I don't know if it's like movement as much as just like different, like kind of using different tools and seeing that those bring out different aspects of relationship with God. So one of those tools would be, I think I grew up with a lot of like rigorous study and theology, and that was really, really, I'm so grateful for that foundation.
Yeah.
And then I think at a certain point here more recently, I began to crave like the more listening than studying, right? So if I have time to just to use that time to just be still rather than to try to like dissect all the things in the text, you know, if I'm like sitting with Scripture. Yeah. And I think that kind of like contemplative prayer has been so restorative to me because it reminds me that I don't have to work for it, that we receive from God. And I think Sabbath, like in the Jewish tradition, like this idea of really taking it seriously and not just refraining from things, but celebrating and feasting, that having those rhythms built in, some of those things have really deepened my understanding of spirituality. And it's not that God's any different. It's just that I've really gotten quiet enough sometimes to hear and to know how incredibly generous He is. And when we have a quiet moment, He is waiting and anticipating to lavish that kind of affirmation that we need. So I began to crave that more and more. And that certainly feels like growth.
Yeah, it does. And honestly, what you're describing to me is exactly what I'm talking about. What I was sort of needling for is, it's just very interesting to me because I've heard that story 50 times now on this podcast. You know, I grew up, like, just to reframe your story, you know, I grew up where study was really important. And now I'm in this phase where listening, receiving, contemplation, and where Sabbath isn't just abstinence of certain things, but it's a celebration of other things, right? Yeah, and you're right. God hasn't changed, but the way that I encounter Him has grown. It's become more wide, expansive. And we've just heard so many versions of that story on the podcast. I want to keep needling for that because it seems to give people permission and imagination for other ways they might experience God.
Yeah. Yeah, man, that's so, I mean, it's neat to hear that.
No, it's literally everywhere. I mean, basically, here's what I've come to realize after talking to a bunch of people over a couple years. If you grew up Reformed, you're going to run headlong into a charismatic or contemplative experience. That's what you're headed for. And if you grew up very, very Pentecostal and very, very charismatic, get ready. You're going to run into like study and words and whatever. It's almost like we run to the other side of the coin sometimes.
Yeah, that's right. And there are things that are revealed in the time they need to be revealed. And each strand, all these different traditions, even within the Christian church, they each bring gifts, you know, and if you've had a lot of one and then you go through a time when, I mean, I've really enjoyed that, just seeing how different people practice their faith.
Same. I've been so touched by it. I think it's been the defining characteristic of the last 10 years of my life is just seeing, those people, they know something about God that I just didn't get growing up, you know, and it doesn't mean that my growing up experience was bad. It was deficient in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hey, let's drill down one more time on something you just said a moment ago. You've reframed Sabbath as not just like omitting something but celebration, like things that bring life. Can you talk about that?
What rest is like, I guess, how would I say this concisely? I guess it's, there are practices within that can be really restorative. And one little thing that I learned was that in the Jewish practice, Sabbath actually starts the night before. So when you go to sleep at sundown on the night before the Sabbath, that's actually when the Sabbath starts. And like we were saying before, when you live a lot of the time, like when I live a lot of the time, like I've got to do all the work and this has got to be about me. And I, it's such a practical reminder that he's actually doing the rest within you while you're asleep, before you even wake up in the morning. Beautiful point and an invitation to a different way of living that's not our natural instinct. And it's like, God's people were in exile in the Old Testament, and yet there were these glimmers of hope. There was always something pulling them forward. And I think the Sabbath is a day that helps us to like really point those things out and to say, man, there's evidence of God's light breaking in all over the place, and we have to talk about it on purpose. We have to make that part of our life so that we don't just live in the shadows.
Yeah, even in Genesis, when God finishes creating the world, he rests. And part of what I think that text is trying to say is it's not just that he didn't work, but he enjoyed his work.
Yeah.
And so there's something about Sabbath that's meant to be a moment where we can sit back and go, wow, this is to really enjoy the work that we've put into our life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's like one of the prayers that's been helpful for me came out of that Genesis reading or that passage you're talking about, like in the very beginning when the Spirit hovers over the waters. And there's this image of the sea, like the waters, which in a lot of the texts in the Bible, actually, somebody told me that it actually means like chaos.
Yeah.
And so taking order out of chaos and just realizing that God is always bringing order out of chaos, and he's doing that daily, and he's doing that in each. And I think that is something to celebrate, because it does feel a little bit foggy these days, right?
It does. It does. But what's interesting is even this year, this has been a tough year for lots of people, and especially for artists who make their living, traveling, touring, and even get that internal vocational itch sort of scratched.
Yeah.
This has been a tough year, but one of the things that I've been noticing when I've been having conversations with people is that there have been hidden gifts inside of it. Mm-hmm. And so there's this sense in which, yes, there's been a lot of disorder, but underneath the surface, there's been some really good stuff that could only be God.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that too.
That's good. Well, let me ask you a couple questions about your new record, if that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so you have this record, Patient Kingdom, and just so you know, it's been my drive to church music on Sunday morning.
Oh, great.
So when I'm coming to church, like if I'm getting ready to preach or something, like I always want to listen to something that's in the right space. So I for the last maybe, 6 or 8 weeks, this record has been my come to church on Sunday morning record.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad.
Yeah, it has been. It just fits a perfect space for me. But I guess I'm wondering, I have my own thoughts here, but I'm wondering, what's the center of the record for you? Like thematically, is there a song, or is there a theme that was sort of underpinning the making of the record?
So as initially I had cast a vision for an album of songs that really push back against anxiety. And then the second theme that emerged, because it was in 2020 that we were making this album, is just the theme of patience and this ushering in of the patient kingdom. So those two themes are really woven together in the songs. Those ideas, they kind of move back and forth. They kind of do a little dance. Like you have a song like You Are With Me that's almost a lament. And that's a song that's kind of standing in the middle saying, okay, patience is not always easy. It's painful. I think that song is important for that reason. And then you have something that's more like Traveling Wilburys, like the song that's Lay My Worry Down, which was actually one of the last songs to be written for the album. It's one of the newest ones. And that one just felt like, a protest song that I needed to sing right in the middle of it. So I wrote that one with Cindy Morgan.
Well, I love that song. That song is actually my jam on the record.
Is it?
Yes. No, of all the songs, for whatever reason, maybe it's just 2020, but that one has been, that's my
I'm
jam.
glad.
Well, I guess I wanted to ask one question about that song in particular, since you brought it up.
Okay.
The title of the song is Lay My Worry Down, but it's kind of the chorus. It's the repeat. Is that a personal line?
How so? Like the actual phrasing of it?
Yeah, no, I'm saying like, lay my worry down. Is that something you're singing to yourself?
Oh, yes, for sure.
Well, I'll tell you what I think is interesting about that song. Because you mentioned it's like Traveling Wilburys, and I get that reference right away. But what's also interesting about it is you've got the song It's lay my worry down. If we just looked at the words on the page, you might assume that song would go a certain way, but then the music and the production is sort of juxtaposed to it a little bit.
Yeah.
Because that chorus is kind of happy, right?
Because it's not sad.
Yeah, it's not sad, which is interesting because for me anyway, it became like an earworm. A couple nights ago, the kids had gotten up from the dinner, and I'm wash dishes guy. That's kind of my thing, you know? And so I'm sitting there washing the dishes, and in my head, I'm just kind of singing that chorus, I'll lay my worries down. And I'm realizing, just there's something about the pop side of this melody that keeps bringing this back to me. And I just think that's kind of genius.
Oh, well, I'm so glad.
Yeah.
Maybe it's maybe it can be kind of a therapeutic
it's a mantra.
way of using pop music.
Yeah, it is. Well, I'll tell you this as well. I just love anytime a lyric is one way and the song goes another way. I oftentimes love somebody who kind of takes it a different direction.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad. Yeah. It's like, I think there was an intentional effort to make these songs joyful. So even if it's an album about, anxiety, that the songs would have a lift. And, I would say that's okay to not always have that. I did an album called Songs from the Valley, and that was an album of lament, and I think with this one, it was like, hey, I want to say true things about what we're afraid of. And I want us to know we're not alone in that. But I also want us to do it with joy, where this defiance, this will not be the last word for me. So I really appreciate you bringing that out, just the contrast between the music and the lyric.
Yeah, so good. Well, let me ask you about one more song.
Okay.
Thirst No More.
Yeah.
Okay, the verses feel like they're 100 years old. Okay, so I listened to that song one time, and it feels like I know the verses, like the melody. Mm-hmm. And then the chorus, I think, feels more modern. So that's very cool. But I guess my question is, where does that hymn-like sensibility come from in your writing? Because I think it's pretty consistent through your writing. A lot of times your verses feel like, I know this.
Yeah. Well, I do love the old hymns, and I like even thinking about Christmas carols and the songs that everybody knows, right? Anywhere we can find those rallying points. I think that when we gather around content like lyrics or poetry or hymns that are from another time, I think it can help us to see some of our blind spots and connect to questions that are bigger than just our present moment. So I really love that. And I've spent a lot of time with old hymns. And so it probably just comes out almost accidentally. Wrote that one with Matt Wirtz and Leslie Jordan. And Leslie she's such a melodic writer and had a lot to do with that chorus, just bringing that out. And so but I think there's a playfulness even to the guitar part. And if I play it as a solo acoustic song, it just kind of sings. It's just easy to ramble it. And again, hopefully it'll be one of those that sticks in your head that helps you to keep coming back to the well.
Yeah. I'm always very intrigued by songs like that. I love them. Mm-hmm. I have a friend here at my home church who just has a knack for doing that very thing. And because of that, his songs just go deeper and further because you almost don't need an instrument to sing them. Mm-hmm. And so that, they kind of just, the melody just kind of works. You can carry it around with you for the rest of the day, whether you have a piano by your side or a guitar, it doesn't really matter. So I'm always very interested by people who are able to pull that off.
Man, that's really, I think that's helped me over the years just to think about songs without an instrument. I wrote one a few months ago and I didn't have anything. I had this tiny Casio that belongs to the kids. And I wrote this little melody and I was like, how do you make this really singable? And it was a great exercise. And I think it strengthened the melody to not play it on my guitar and to rely on some of the things I'm used to relying on.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant little insight. Sometimes taking away our guitar helps us.
Yeah, that's right.
So good. Well, listen, everybody who's listening to the podcast, you got to check out this record, Patient Kingdom. So good.
Thank you. Thanks
Sandra,
so much.
let's do this. One more question, and this is going to be the ending of every episode for season 3.
Okay.
Okay, so you're going to take first stab at it, okay?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because this is finish this sentence. this one thing I know is blank.
This one thing I know is that it's going to be okay. Like, we're going to get through to the other side. Full stop.
Full stop. That's a great place to end. We're going to make it,
Thanks,
y'all.
Adam.
You're going to make it. All right, Sandra, thanks for coming on the pod.
Yeah, I appreciate it so much. Great questions, and just thanks for being so engaged.
Yeah. Peace.
Hey everyone, Casey Corum here, producer of the podcast. Thanks for listening to episode 1 of season 3. Wow, can't believe it. As always, if you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. First of all, leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Also, connect with us on social media. Instagram at the Ferment Podcast and Twitter at FermentCast. All right, everyone, thanks for listening. See you next week. Peace.